Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky was in Spain today, meeting with officials there to secure more military aid. After more than 820 days of war, President Zelensky says that Vladimir Putin's army is still dropping around 3,000 bombs on his nation's sovereign territory every month. On Saturday, Russian strikes hit a shopping center in Kharkiv, a cowardly move hitting what is clearly a civilian target. The attack, captured here by security cameras, killed at least 18 people, local officials confirmed today. Multiple reports citing police say that a 12-year-old girl was among the dead. Dozens of people were injured in the brutal assault. And yesterday, President Zelensky released a new video in English, standing inside what remains of a Ukrainian publishing house that was destroyed by Russian bombs. He talks about the constant attacks from Putin that people in Kharkiv are facing and asks the world to continue helping Ukraine in this illegal war.
We all know who are we dealing with. Russia is run by men who want to make it a norm, burning lives, destroying cities and villages, dividing people and erasing national borders through war. There is no nation that can stop such war alone. Unaided world leaders' engagement is needed. I'm now in Kharkiv, a city in the east of Ukraine, and unfortunately very close to the border on Russia. What does it mean for Kharkiv? A third year of constant terror. More than 1 million of people in this city. And every night and every day, Russian army is shelling the city, mostly with S-300 missiles, just like all other Russian strikes on hundreds of other of our cities and villages. Some of them, once booming with life, are now burned to ashes, people less. A burnt-out emptiness, the most horrible consequence of war. War that we didn't want in Ukraine, that we haven't provoked, and in which Ukraine is defending itself from Russian attempts to seize our resources and territories and destroy our national identity.
In the same video, President Zelensky asked President Biden and President Xi Jinping of China to join delegations from dozens of other nations at a peace summit in Switzerland next month. It's the kind of invitation President Zelensky knows he could never make if Donald Trump is allowed back in the Oval Office. Trump was, of course, impeached for trying to extort Ukraine to go after Joe Biden. And last week, Trump took the unprecedented move to insert himself, a presidential candidate with a professed adoration of Vladimir Putin, into the very delicate situation involving Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who is currently held in a Russian prison. Trump claims that he and he alone can convince his favorite autocrat to release the jailed journalist, posting, quote, "Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, will do that for me, but not for anyone else, and we will be paying nothing." What's the quid pro quo for that? Joining us now is Michael McFaul, who served as the U.S. ambassador to Russia from 2012 to 2014. He is also an MSNBC international affairs analyst. Ambassador, I'm grateful for you to be here. I want to start with what Trump posted about Evan Gershkovich. The idea that Trump is saying that he and he alone has the keys to the cell, literally, to get an American home from Russia. And yet he's not doing it right now. He has the power and the ability to do it. So he's using Evan's life as a pawn. Talk a little bit about why, A, Putin would never agree to this, and B, why it's suddenly okay for Trump to decide to use that as some type of power play.
Well, first, you're absolutely right. If he has that power, he should use it now. Why not? He could call his friend Vladimir and say, let Evan out, and he could show to the world that he has this close, special, personal relationship with Putin that he's always bragging about, that he's always claiming would be in America's national interest. So he should do that now. There's no reason to wait till January should he win the presidential election. But second, it won't happen because he does not have that kind of power and influence over Vladimir Putin, despite what he brags about claiming that he can do. He didn't think about it. He was president for 4 years. He met with Mr. Putin. They had a summit in Helsinki. They had meetings from time to time. But try to think about what concrete national security interests were achieved for the United States of America because of that close personal relationship. I literally can't think of a single thing.
The other thing that I want to talk about is the fact that Russia has launched a multi-front invasion of Ukraine. The Baltic states have actually said that if Russia makes some type of significant breakthrough in terms of that multi-front invasion, that they're actually contemplating sending troops into Ukraine to aid Ukraine without waiting for NATO to give them the green light. There's also an issue, Ambassador, about the fact that the United States and other countries have said that their weapons cannot be used to actually be entering into Russian territory. But aren't we at the point now where a lot of this is just conversation and it's time for people to actually take action to help the Ukrainians?
Yes. There is a lot of anxiety in Ukraine. I talk to Ukrainians every day. There's a lot of anxiety in the region, as you just rightly noted. I was in Lithuania a few months ago, and there's extreme anxiety that if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, he will try to threaten the states of NATO, especially if Mr. Trump is president, to test to see if we will stand by our allies. I don't think it would be prudent for NATO countries to send soldiers to Ukraine. I do think, however, it is extremely prudent and long overdue for the Biden administration and the rest of the NATO allies to give President Zelensky the license to use the weapons that we have transferred to him to defend Ukraine, especially in Kharkiv that you have been showing in your show already. Kharkiv is right on the border of Russia. Russians are shooting into Kharkiv from Russian territory, and the Ukrainians cannot fire back. They should have the right to self-defense. That's a concept embedded in the United Nations Charter. It's a pretty American idea, too, the right to self-defense. I think the time is now, because if we let Vladimir Putin succeed around Kharkiv, that is the beginning of threatening our NATO allies in the neighborhood there.
And that's really the important message, right? I think people kind of lose sight sometimes in terms of why it's so important for the United States to aid Ukraine. It's not just Ukraine, it's the other countries that are not only in Europe, but frankly, the rest of the world if Putin remains unchecked. And so do you think that that meeting in Switzerland, that you're actually going to see somebody like Biden and Xi Jinping actually show up for something like that?
Well, your first point could not be stressed more. There's somehow this idea that Putin just wants a little bit of territory and then he's going to relax. There's no reason to believe that. He didn't stop in 2008 after invading Georgia. He didn't stop after 2014 when he annexed Crimea as part of Ukraine. There's no reason he will stop unless he is stopped on the battlefield. And it is in America's national interest to allow the Ukrainians to stop him in Ukraine so that we are not dragged into a war when we have to defend our allies in NATO. So that nothing could be more important in terms of our national interest. With respect to the peace conference, I hope that all national leaders will go. I'm not optimistic that Xi Jinping will show up or even President Biden, but I think it's an important meeting because it will demonstrate that Zelensky is serious about peace. Putin, so far, is not.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. Ambassador Michael McFaul, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.